All right, welcome back to our podcast. I'm Tiffany Herlin, a licensed clinical social worker, and today I'm interviewing Clint Dorny. He's the executive director of Discovery Ranch, which is a residential treatment program for teenage boys. Please remember that this podcast is not a replacement for therapy, and always seek a mental health professional for your situation. All right, Clint, tell us a little bit about yourself and what your role is at Discovery Ranch.
So I'm the executive director at Discovery Ranch. I have been there from day one. I was their first hire initially to do admissions, and 3 weeks into it, they said, "We want you to be the executive director."
That's awesome.
And I asked them, "What's my job description?" And they literally patted me on the back and said, "You'll figure it out." And so 18 and a half, almost 19 years later, I'm still here and figuring it out and still learning and still growing. So I started in this industry over almost 25 years ago. Maybe longer, working in residential treatment, doing admissions, and helped start some programs for other groups, and moved to California, back to Utah and Idaho, and so landed here, and I love Discovery Ranch. Yeah,
you're rocking it. I love your program. I've always loved working with you, and
likewise.
You're dynamite for sure. So excited to have you and your expertise and talking about this topic. Okay, so in this episode, we're going to be talking about how to build resilience in highly sensitive kids, what parents need to know about this. So why is it especially important for parents to avoid the trap of being a lawnmower, helicopter, or bulldozer parent when their child is highly sensitive?
Well, what we see is we have a lot of anxious parents, and we hate a lot of anxious kids. And our motto is strength is in the struggle,
which I love. Such a cool motto.
And it was formulated by an experience we had early on. And I wish we could say we started with that in mind, but we had a boy who had found his dad who had committed suicide. And everybody's reaction was that, right? And so we have our calf program. We work with baby cows. They bottle feed them 3 times a day, 365 days a year, rain, snow, or shine. And it provides a lot of work and a lot of sacrifice and service for somebody else besides themselves. And his calf died.
Really?
And that was the first reaction we all had, was like, you got to be kidding me. Of all the kids, this is the last thing this kid needs, right? That was our first thought. And so we met for hours trying to figure out, what can we do to mitigate this experience for this kid? How can we save him from this experience? And after a couple days, we finally looked at each other and said, we just need to walk him through it. He's in a safe place. We can process all the emotion. And what happened is, had we done anything different than just walked him through it, we would have robbed him from the catalyst that actually brought about all the emotion that he'd been stuffing and using drugs to stuff because of the trauma that he had. We would have robbed him from that catalyst that totally changed his life. And so we had this experience with him and just said, you know what? Strength is in the struggle. And it was Jerry, our equine guy, who coined that phrase for us, and it's been around ever since. It's on our walls, it's on our shirts.
Yeah, I think I have one.
Yeah. And so life is tough. Life sucks. Life is hard. Life isn't fair. I'm a twin, and I'm the fat twin. So life isn't fair.
No, you're not.
I am. He's got me by at least 30 pounds, or I've got him by 30 pounds. So you look at life, and parents. My brother and I realized that life wasn't fair when we were teenagers, right? He got better grades. He was a half inch taller. I was older. All the comparisons that twins do. And so I think that's an underlying thing that parents try to make life fair all the time. And the reality is life isn't fair. We're not equal. Like, my brother and I aren't equal. He has strengths and I have weaknesses, and we have different things, right? And so it's learning to look at ourselves and be okay with who we are, and look at our strengths and weaknesses, and that's what builds strength.
Well, I always like to say that, a comfort zone is a beautiful place, like where nothing grows. And you really, the challenge when you're out of your comfort zone, like that's when you really actually grow.
Yeah.
Like, that's when your character is built.
People don't change because of ease.
Yeah.
In fact, they come to us because of ease, not because of struggle. You can only gain muscle by tearing the muscle and ripping it and letting it grow bigger, right? And the same thing is with our emotions, right? Not that we have to create tears in our emotional states, right? But we have to push. We have to let kids figure out how to swim, but it's scary at first. Like we can't take fear away from life.
Yeah.
We have to teach kids to walk through it.
Well, we can't go around putting them in a bubble and, protecting them from everything, because eventually they're going to experience something hard. We won't be around all the time to protect them from that. And we're really just doing them a disfavor.
Exactly.
I mean, what you're talking about is, I have a note later on, but we'll jump to it now, like the growth zone, which is where you get out of your comfort zone and you're forced to grow. Like the strength is in the struggle. Like that's exactly what you're talking about.
Right. So I use an analogy that I learned from a master teacher. He was a professor at UC Davis. He taught animal science and plant life. And so he was teaching a master's class here locally for free about growing stuff, right? Growing. And he talked about partitioning. So partitioning is
explain.
Right. So when you say, let's say you have a tomato plant and you want it to grow, right? And he waits till his wilts and then he waters it again. So he might only water it every 2 weeks. And what he said was, if you water it often, too much, you get a very big plant and you get little to no fruit.
So what I'm doing with my own plants is perfect.
Probably, right?
I wait too long.
So the only way to actually create fruit is to starve the plant.
Interesting.
Right? And so it's called partitioning, where if you water it all the time, it just grows and you get really big, but you produce nothing. Do you see the analogy with kids? Mm-hmm. And then, but you have to starve the plant or struggle, and then they go into produce fruit mode, and then they actually produce a lot of fruit. And so it's this balance, right? A balance of how much do you give them, and then how much do you let them struggle on their own and figure it out, and then you actually gain fruit, right, from the plant. And so I listen to that, and that's really what we do. There's a support network. There's all these things that we do to support and keep kids safe, and but we're providing challenges for them. We're providing something that's hard, but guess who wins when they do things that are hard? They do.
Well, I've talked about this in another podcast. Is there a lot of times at a residential treatment program or with experiential therapy, you're providing a perceived threat or perceived risk. Yeah. But in reality, they're safe with what we're setting them up for. But in their minds, because they're hyper aroused, they have some PTSD, trauma triggers. They're thinking they're not safe, and this is a really challenging task, and it's really scary, and they're going to be hurt. When in reality, we know they're safe.
Yeah. Well, we do that with our horses.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That they're next to a 1,200-pound animal that could kill you if it wanted to, right? It could do that. Yeah. But it chooses to have a relationship with you and wants to have that relationship. But it's kids overcoming themselves. Yeah. That growth, right, that you're talking about. It's as if they can learn to overcome their own fears. Yeah. You've taught them a life skill.
Well, this is hard for parents, because especially parents that I think you and I have worked with, they just are so terrified at wanting to keep their kids safe. Their kids have done risky behaviors and, have gone through hard things, and they just really want to helicopter that, because you're anxious, you have fear. And when you have that, you want to control things.
Right.
Yeah, which is just a false reality. Right. It's a false perceived safety, right? You really can't control things, especially with kids.
Right. You can guide, you can hope.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Right, for sure.
So that leads me to my next question. What is resilience? Why is it even important for teens who may be more sensitive?
You know, it's interesting that you say the sensitivity, because we see kids with a lot of emotion. They have a lot of things going on, and it shows up in oppositionality. It shows up and they just want control of their own lives, right? But it's really that they're super sensitive. They actually, a little bit can go a long way with these kids, and sometimes it's just overload. And so with resilience, you want kids to be able to be okay with making mistakes and continue on. That it's not, you want to stay away from black and white thinking, where it's like, I'm either the best or I'm the worst and I won't even try. Yeah.
Which is what we get a lot of.
We get a lot of that.
Yeah.
And so it's helping them understand. Like we just met with a basketball team last night. A bunch of kids are struggling. They're not very good. They're new. They're a new team. They've only known played together for a month. Yet we're playing against kids that have played together their whole lives in the local rec leagues. And we talked to them about that very thing. It's like, hey guys, I'm not worried about you win or lose. I'm worried about if you give up. And when I coach my own kids, I tell them, guys, I don't get mad at you. I'm gonna yell from the sidelines. I'm coaching you, right? I'm trying to help. The only time I'll really get upset is if I see you give up. That's just not an option. And luckily, I haven't had to get mad at my kids. They go, they fight, win or lose. And that's the conversation I had with the boys last night as they were heading to their game and they were struggling. It's guys, you're going to go play against kids who've, by all means, have had an easier life than yours. But guess what? You're going to be more prepared in the long run because you've learned to do hard things, right? And if you give up now, that's not going to bode well for you, right? Like, we're more worried about that than anything you're going to go do right now. It's learning to do hard things, building that resiliency, and that you can do it, that you understand that you can try and you can still succeed. You can fail and keep going, right?
Yeah, which is, brings me to like why adversity and trials are so important for these types of kids, because it helps them build, it helps them realize they can be resilient. They don't have to give up, and they can do hard things.
Well, and I think there's an art of forgiveness that's a part of this as well. That forgiving yourself, forgiving others, working past stuff, things that life that happens, and you could spend your whole life being offended or playing a victim role, and they feel justified. And so a lot of what we do is help them look at that differently, reframing their life for them so that they can gain control. And they realize that they're actually in control. They can actually control how long they stay.
How do you get them out of that victim mode to the resilient side?
Well, so the ranch is really designed around walking kids through phases of development, right? That we have a level system that walks them through, like, how do we achieve that, is what you asked. It's 3 phases of development, from dependence to independence to interdependence in our relationships. And the kids go from a process where we have to create structure for them, this external locus of control, because they haven't figured out the internal locus of control yet, right?
Yeah, it's so much easier to control everything externally of you when you're in that state.
Well, they have to, because they can't really do it themselves. So that's why they're dependent. They think they're in control, but they're actually dependent on other people to meet their needs, because they're manipulating or figuring things out to get other people to do stuff, because they really can't, and they've kind of maladapted behaviors around that. And so it's about constant feedback and about putting them in situations where they get to practice it and learn it and practice. And so they go from, and our level system walks them through this process, right? So we're going from dependent behavior, where we're providing the structure for them, to independence, because they really want control of themselves. They really do. And we want to give it to them, right? There's more than anything. Parents want the kids to take control, right? But what they want is the final stage, which is actually interdependence, which builds trust. And so, can
you explain to our listeners what interdependence is? Because I always like to do these podcasts as if we had someone who had no idea what the terms we're using.
Well, so obviously in relationships, if you're dependent, you're relying on other people to meet your needs. You go from an independence part, but then you're separate from other people. It's like, I'm independent and I can do what I want, but I really don't see how I affect other people. The interdependency is when you have a give and take in relationships, right? And so I talk about the will of the child, where when they're in that dependent phase, they're really just focused on themselves, right? And then they begin to sacrifice that will. And they start to realize, like, wait, I'm actually happier when I do things for other people, right? But sacrificing, I thought, was the key, and it's great, right? And yet it's still only halfway. It's when they actually have a change of heart, where they become interdependent with their parents, and they have this loving, giving, taking, and relationships, and that's going to go to their significant others down the road and their family, where it is give and take. We're both giving 100%, not me taking and you taking and, going back and forth. But that's when love and trust becomes the motivation. So it goes from sacrifice, which is I'm giving up. I'm still only halfway there when I say, well, I want that, but I'm willing to give that up for this, but I'm still sacrificing. My half of my heart still wants to be over here in this, drugs, right? I want drugs, but I'm willing to give them up because I want this, but I'm still stuck fighting this battle, right? I'm still caught between 2 worlds of giving that old stuff up and going to the new stuff. And then when they realize they get to our higher levels, and granted, if Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're not going to get to self-actualization by level 5, right? That's not the goal. But it's that they're on this path of realizing that relationships are important, that the self-imposed structure, so we impose the structure at the beginning, and then it goes to self-imposed structure, which the other side of the pyramid, which is there's little to no relationship when a kid first comes in. It's all structure, but as time goes on, we build that the relationships becomes the motivator, and the structure becomes self-imposed. And so then they're ready to go out to the world, and they have trusting relationships. They're doing it, right? They build that resiliency, and so.
That's awesome. And so from what I'm hearing, they're becoming selfless, they're gaining empathy and compassion.
Yeah.
And they're looking outside of themselves, really.
Totally.
Which is
I'm not just focused in. I'm actually looking outward.
Which is what we would hope for most adults in the world, which some are still working on. I'm still working on,
We all are. That's what I'm saying. Is
Journey,
we're not all there. And obviously, like, I thought I was patient until I had kids, right? As a teenager and as a young adult, I'm pretty patient. And then you have kids and you're like, oh, I realize I'm not very patient. So
yeah. No, kids are good at shining light. There's a definition on this that I really like that I want to share, which is resilience is made up of two key components, adversity and positive adaptation. Without adversity, there is no challenge and therefore no need to adapt.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, we see that with kids who struggle from going from one teacher to another, one classroom, or grades and transitions in life, and they struggle. And that's what we're trying to build is, hey, and it's amazing when the kids realize what I see from the ranch kids is I see a lot of anxiety when they first come in, a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of different things. And when they leave, they're comfortable in their own skin. They know who they are. They know their strengths and weaknesses, right? And we always use this term of the glass is half empty or half full. And everybody's learned to say, I see it as half full. In therapy, we're the whole glass. And
explain, what's that mean?
Well, so everybody wants to say, positive, but we don't know where that line actually is.
Oh.
And it's through these experiences, right? So if we put a kid with a horse and he does X, Y, or Z, and he reveals where he's at by the choices he makes, right? That every experience we give, cross-country skiing, playing basketball, all the different off and on-campus activities, how he treats his calf, that is a drop in the water that shows us where the line's actually at, right? Kids will say, well, I'm this full, I'm, whatever, right? Parents do that. But the reality is every experience we reveal who we are.
Oh, I love that.
And so we are the whole glass. What we're trying to determine is how much water is actually in it by every experience. And some kids will lie and say, well, I'm way up here. And the reality is their functioning's down lower, and either they are lying about it or they have a blind spot and can't see it. And so you're having these discussions of them kind of reality check a lot, right? And there's people would probably be pretty surprised how therapeutic these discussions are and how kind of blunt and but loving at the same time of like, hey, this isn't working for you. Did you realize this?
Well, that's what therapy is holding up a mirror and saying, are you willing to really see yourself and where you're at?
Okay, I like the way you say that better.
Yeah.
I'll use that next time.
But yours was good too. I mean,
but you're reflecting those things back to them, and some kids take it on and grow very quickly, and they just go thank you, and other kids fight it, and they don't want to, and then they leave and they blame everyone else still for their issues, and yet
stay in victim mode.
Oh yeah. But it's the best thing when you can see a kid grab that and just really look, and then you have these relationships for life, and the kids we keep in touch with to this day, just they're having kids, they're having families, they're married, they're on Wall Street, they're psychologists, they're all doing their thing, and it's amazing.
I just saw one of my kids on a TED Talk the other day, and I was like, no way.
That's
and
awesome.
His TED Talk was powerful. So it's just so cool to see them overcome these adversities and build that resilience and to grow into who they are.
Keep you from going anywhere. We have a kid who graduated from West Point. We have, all different Ivy League schools and just amazing things.
Yeah.
Right?
Clint, let me ask you this. A lot of parents with sensitive kids or who've been traumatized and are highly sensitive from these traumatic incidences in their lives, they may be worried that they're going to traumatize their kid by exposing them to challenges or re-traumatize them, and just so they're extra anxious and fearful and protective. How can you help parents understand that challenging these sensitive kids in a way can actually lead to growth and not to more trauma? How does that?
Well, and what we find is that we have to do quite a bit of work with the parents to help them understand. And when they come and tour the ranch, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of anxiety that they have. Granted, and a lot of it's founded in the decisions that kids have made. And but sometimes that helicoptering, that bulldozing actually is driving the behavior at the same time, because what kids want is control of their lives. So if we're not careful, we're actually driving the students to act the way they're acting instead of bringing them closer, because we might be too harsh. We might be too overprotecting. We might, and so.
Also, you might have an overly sensitive parent who's also projecting an overly sensitive kid, right?
For sure. And
now you even realize it.
Yeah. And so they're, what I find is that, and this gives the enablers a lot of anxiety, is we ask them to do less.
Explain. I mean, because that's so counterintuitive to our parents.
I know. And so a lot of them, it's, hey, so we use the analogy of a cocoon, right?
Uh-huh.
That when there's a storyline of about the butterfly goes in a cocoon, or the caterpillar goes into a cocoon, and it's struggling to get out. And so as someone sits there and watches it, an enabler would go, oh, like that's struggling. I just want to help it. And they would just cut the cocoon open a little bit to help it get out. And what happens is it gets out and flops over and dies.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Because what happens is the fluid, like the struggle that it has, talk about strength in the struggle that it has to push itself out of the cocoon is what forces the fluid out into its wings and allows its wings to form. So by helping it, you're actually harming it. And so there's always this delicate balance, right? Because kids do need help, right? And they don't get there out of malice. They get there because they see a need and the kids are struggling in it. So it's this art about how much do they actually need help, right? So there's one example. We had a kid who needed a lot of help, and he was complaining to his grandparents who happened to be there. And I heard him on the phone and said, or they asked him, well, show us what you need. So his next test in school, he got a 3%. And he's sitting out in the hallway, and I walked up and I knew the whole storyline, right? And so I started talking to him, and he's sitting on the ground sulking, and I said, well, I understand you got a 3% in your test. Well, yeah, I need help, and he's like, I need help. And I said, statistically speaking, you would have had to have purposefully answered them wrong you could have guessed and gotten higher than 3%. And he looked up at me, and I'm like, gig's over. Totally caught him at it. And I said, hey, so if we help you more than you actually need, are you going to grow? And he's like, he just looked up and he's like, no. And I said, so really we need to know what's actually true. Like if we help you more, then we're actually helping you stay where you're at and not growing at all. But where do you want to go? Where do you want to be? And it led to a whole different discussion. And so we're comfortable having those discussions, right? We have highly sensitive kids. They're going to struggle, and they're okay, right? They're going to be okay. Why it works is because we're not emotionally tied to the outcome yet. Because they'll blow up, they'll cry, they'll do whatever they did at home to get what they wanted, and we look at our watches and go, "Are you done?" Because we're not going to respond. They're used to pressing A and B and C and having mom or dad go A, B, or C, and we don't respond the same way. And so they go, oh, that doesn't work. I got to try something different.
Well, it's learned helplessness, right? Our kids get really good at realizing.
And it's unintentional.
Yeah,
right? I mean,
it's subconscious at times.
Right.
But they learn that they get the help that they need, when they are more helpless.
Right. So in the past, we have parents who would be like, well, I did this and I did this and I did this. And so we're going to say, you know what? Your kid needs to learn how to swim. You can't stand in the pool. You can't hold them in the water. You've got to watch them. So we're actually asking them to do less. And you see the anxiety and the fear in their face just kind of go, oh, and they're like, it's okay. You can do it. You can do it. Your kid can struggle. He's going to be okay. He's going to be in a safe place. We're going to take care of his needs. We have nurses. We got doctors. We have all this help and support so that your kid can succeed.
You got the medical team waiting outside the pool area.
Right? Right. And so, but it's like, hey, we've seen thousands of kids come through our system, and they can do it. And some fight it a little bit longer than others. That's okay. We're in there, right? And so it's getting them to trust the process. And granted, it's got to be scary to hand your child over. You're not giving us your car, right? We're not fixing your car. We're giving your most prized possession, and it's a sacred responsibility for us. We take it very serious. These kids become our lifelong kids. We're going to track them the rest of their lives.
Talk to the parents who maybe have adopted kids and adopted kids who are highly sensitive, who have gone through trauma. I mean, that's even scarier for those parents because they know
for sure.
Whether they've adopted this kid from birth or later on in their life, they know this kid has struggles from day one.
And the kids are testing that all the time, right? They want to know. And so we've heard them say, well, you just throwing me away. All those things.
They're worried about being abandoned, not feeling loved enough as, say, their own biological kid. Like these parents come in with so many more fears.
Right.
So how do you address that?
Well, so part of the process we learned early on, we really don't work with reactive attachment because our kids, they're a little different.
To our listeners, brief.
So reactive attachment is I don't want to have a relationship with you. You just take care of me and thank you and see you, right? They kind of push away, right? Our kids typically jump into relationships very quickly. They're more of an anxious attachment style. They jump in, they fall in love in 10 minutes. They smother and so they inadvertently push people away because they just come on too strong. They don't have that balance in their relationship. And so they're kind of opposite. our kid would get ostracized in a reactive attachment program because those kids don't want to have relationships. Our kids desperately do. They just don't know how to find that balance and jump in. And so typically our kids are highly attached. There's some gray area in here as well, right? As things happen, but our kids want to have relationships. They love hellos. They don't like the goodbyes. And so our calf program actually exposes them to that, where they take care of a baby cow 3 times a day, bottle feed it, name it. And about the 2-month mark, that calf goes through a maturation process, just like the kids are going to go through. It mirrors them, but they do it in 2 months. So they go from being very needy and relying on you to being independent and interdependent in a 2-month lifespan, right? And then, or span of 2 months. And so they go from that, and then they can live independently in the herd. And then the kid will get exposed to it again by doing it a second time or a third time and a fourth time with another calf. But they're the surrogate parent. They're not the ones receiving all this. They're the ones giving it. So we've had kids say, now I know how my parents feel. That I love this
powerful.
calf. I love, they see it from a different perspective. So a lot of those things get addressed throughout that process. We know it's coming because it might happen 2 months, 4 months, 6 months down the road, this exposure type therapy. Working with those adoption issues, and Matt, as you meet with him, we have an adoption group, and it's powerful. The kids talk about all those issues and work things through, and they understand how each other's have done, how they've worked through those various issues. And our goal is to reunite families. Our goal is to help them reunite and
heal relationships,
right? And so there's all these people out there that's like, oh, you're taking them out of the home. How does that work? It's like, well, no, it's not working there. We're going to reset it and then work them way back. And so parents come 3 times a year for parent seminars.
Yeah.
They come and visit often.
You're not just working with their child, you're working with the whole family system.
The whole family.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Let me shift gears. I wanted to ask you, how can parents be more comfortable with their son being uncomfortable?
That is the key. And a lot of it is ripping off the Band-Aid in some cases, helping them understand. I have a term called holidays.
What's that?
It's when Christmas comes and you just hope your kid pulls their head out and acts differently
instead of
because
holidays.
Somehow it's holiday, you're right? And they wait to send them to treatment. It gets up to that time during Thanksgiving and Christmas, and they hope things are going to be different. And they always call after and say,
"I've had those.
You were right. It was the holidays, and we should have sent them earlier, right?" And some of them, the biggest growth has been, we had a boy who went home for Christmas and he acted out, and his parents sent him back. And that kid today will tell you that was the most important thing they did for him, was set a limit, and that he missed Christmas with his family. And it was a huge growth time, right? And so it's not that you have to be mean. It's not that you have to cause pain, but change is uncomfortable. And so you're going to have to, and being a parent is not, it's not
totally
you're not
uncomfortable.
Cool. You know that you're not cool as a parent.
I'm constantly out of my comfort zone as a parent.
Right. And so you kind of have to. We work with the parents to kind of help them understand, like, hey, it's not popular to be a parent.
Yeah. Well, you're not their best friend,
but it's worth it, right? And but you do get there, right? It's when your child comes back to you, and my oldest son works with me right now, as he's going through school, and when he came back to work, he finally came back and said, "Dad, I get it." I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, all the things you were trying to do for me, like now that I'm here and I'm like, see what you do.
That's awesome.
And I'm immersed in it. I get it. And that's what you wait for, right? And the relationship, it's always been there, and it's awesome. And now and first grandchild and all that, right? And that's where it's at. So the payoff comes later.
Yeah.
And you got to play the long game.
That's the thing I think I learned when I started as a staff at a residential treatment program, and then even now as a therapist and as a parent, is some of the hardest students I've worked with, and the ones I've had, been called the worst names and the biggest blowouts with, are the ones that after I was uncomfortable and they're uncomfortable and we went through the struggle, I'm the closest to.
Right.
And so when I see my own kids struggling now as a parent, I'm okay with it. Like if they're crying, I'm not like, here's a candy, here's an iPhone, anything to just stop. It's because I'm comfortable with it. I'm like, it's okay. We're struggling. We're going to get through this, and I'm okay.
You've seen the process, and so you can trust the process.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, so it's It's powerful. It's awesome.
So powerful. And I often tell parents that I've worked with in the past that, yes, you were talking about the holidays. You are missing this holiday with your child. And they've done A, B, and C to show that they can't be home and they're not safe. So therefore, they've not maybe specifically chosen to miss these holidays, but they've done things to miss out on these holidays. Yeah. Yet the goal is to get your child back for future holidays, because with the direction they're going, they may not have future holidays with their family that are pleasant and healing and.
So it's most of our kids do not see that far in the future, and it's getting them to see farther in the future and how their decisions affect that, right? Yep. And some of our parents do the same thing, right? Yeah. We as parents, right? I've done it, right? We all do it. I teach this stuff and I still make mistakes with my own kids, right?
Same.
And so luckily kids are resilient, parents are hopefully resilient, and they are. I mean, it's a lot of these lessons are life lessons that I've learned along the way that, from my parents and other things too. So it works.
It does. So we've talked a lot about adversity and the struggle and why that's important. Let's talk about the positive adaptation of that. How do we equip the parents and the kids with the skills to build up the resilience to get through these hard things? What specific things do you help parents and their kids learn?
So I think, there's a lot of things we teach them. We do a lot of parent seminars and individual work with families and parents. The thing that I get to teach is really about balance. It's avoiding, you have it's Eric Byrne's transactional analysis. It's rooted in interpersonal communication, but it lends itself really well to therapy, where you have a critical parent, which is pretty easy to see, right? They're pretty obvious. But there's also, he calls it the enabling parent. Well, we call it the enabling parent. Eric Byrne calls it the nurturing parent. And so it starts off in a great place, but it's just that they're too extreme. Mm-hmm. So what happens is with parents and kids get caught in the middle, is you have one parent who's a little bit more critical, so the other one counteracts it by being a little more nurturing. So then all of a sudden they're going further apart to the point where they're so polarized, but they're both right.
Yeah, that's when you get the Disneyland parent. And
you get the Disneyland parent, and then you get the Nazi, right?
Yeah,
and
tyrant.
Yeah. But they're both right, because they're counteracting each other instead of focusing on the kid. So we and it's not that you can't be a little bit critical or give feedback and do that, and it can't be loving and nurturing. It's this kind of even wave that that goes in between the two, and you have to adjust a little bit for each child, right? Yet none of our kids are the same, right? And so it's that finding that middle ground and balance of still setting boundaries and limits, but still being loving. And so we're trying to get them away from those extremes. And I get to teach that class, and the light will go on. You'll see the light go on for the parents when they're just like, that's me. And so they'll talk in their groups and what they do and how they do it, and come together and work through it. And so it's getting them to come back into the middle, and not that they have to abandon who they are. It's tempering it. It's balancing.
It's just self-awareness.
Yeah.
The more we can become self-aware, the more we can do conscientious parenting or proactive parenting, right? Versus just reactive.
And not to reveal this, because if you come to the ranch, you're going to see this. But what happens is the critical parent tells you you're incapable. The nurturing parent or the enabling parent teaches you you're incapable. So they both lead to low self-esteem, because they're at these dichotomous ends, right? And so it either one can drive them to be where they're at. And so we talk about, then there's the adult ego state. There's all these pieces of that. I love the adult ego state.
Yeah, so we could do a whole podcast on that one, but
and then that's the why, right? And then the how is actually through motivational interviewing, where we get into how you honor. You have to accept that people have the right to choose, right? But that doesn't mean they don't get the consequence. And there's a whole process that we do with that to help them understand and look farther down the road and how your decisions affect you. But you've earned it. Whatever it is, you've earned it. You've made the choice.
Yeah.
So
what about skills for the students you're working with? What do you teach them?
Oh, I mean,
probably so many. Give me a few.
Honesty, respect, responsibility, grit, kindness. We have a whole. We couldn't decide on what to call it, so we called it principles, virtues, and values, because we couldn't decide on one specific thing. But there are 6 or 7 that we work through. Most of those I just named, and then just again that resiliency. Learning to make mistakes and being okay, and getting up the next day and doing it again. We provide
Not
all the
giving up.
academics, all the academics and all that stuff too. We work through, but what we find is that when success breeds success. If you'll have success with the calves or with the horses, then that bleeds over to academics and other parts of their lives. We teach them structure. We teach them how to make their beds. Believe it or not, we have had kids who don't know how to do that.
Or even do their laundry.
Yeah, they do their own laundry. They help with a variety of different things. They help do chores around the ranch. We teach them to work. We teach them that work is important.
We're running out of time, so I want to end with this last question. If you had a parent who had a child who was highly sensitive and been through a lot, and they called you tomorrow, what message would you want them to hear?
A message of hope, that there are answers. There is a way to heal, that you can come out the other side and there's light at the end of the tunnel, right? And you're not alone. That there are so many other parents that are going through the same thing as you. And to trust the process. It's going to be hard, but you can do it, and you're going to work alongside your kid, and you're going to be a family again.
It's awesome. To our parents listening, know that there is hope, and that's why we wanted to talk about this on our podcast, so that you can build strength and resilience, like Clint said. And it was so awesome talking to you about this. Thank you so much. Yeah, appreciate you. And look forward to talking to you in 2 episodes coming up. In our next episode, we're going to be talking about building resilience and a secure attachment in teens with an anxious attachment style with your clinical director, Matt. So we were looking forward to talking with him.
He's awesome.
Yeah. Thanks.